welcoming you and thanking you for joining us. We're going to get started now, and we will be recording this session. We'll make it available through our website in a couple of days. So the information we're sharing, you'll be able to view after we get it reloaded. We are going to ask that you ask questions in the Q&A function. So there's a chat function and a Q&A function. We're asking if you can use the Q&A to submit questions. And our structure today will address three areas. These are high interest topics related to the current COVID period. We'll try and answer questions for about 10 minutes after each session, and then we'll move to the next segment. So the three sessions and three topic areas that we'll focus on will be the property safety protocols. And we have Earl Stoddard, our Director of Emergency Management, Homeland Security, and members of our property code staff to help answer questions. We'll be followed after that session with about 10 minutes to answer questions that have been submitted ahead of time or in the session today. We'll follow that with a rental assistance program update from Ilana Branda of our Department of Health and Human Services. And again, we'll take 10 minutes after that for questions to be answered. And then we'll cover landlord-tenant COVID-related issues and support. And we will try and wrap that up with another 10 minutes of question and answer. We'll work with the time available to us, but we will stay to the focus of finishing up within an hour. So we will end promptly at 3 o'clock. We absolutely understand the impact of the COVID emergency everyone is experiencing on the property management and landlord management side. This is affecting your staff, it's affecting your finances, affecting your investment. So today we're going to cover topics, but we do want to assure you, the county and especially the Department of Housing and Community Affairs is open and we're available, and we have a fair amount of information on our website, but we also have staff that can be available through the contacts we'll be sharing with you. So as we focus today, it's all focused on how we can better work together, and we will try and follow up on a lot of the issues that you're raising today. So with that, we'll start with Earl Stoddard and focus on property issues related to our current environment.
Thank you very much, Frank, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. As Frank said, I'm Dr. Earl Stoddard. I'm the County's Director of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. I also help co-coordinate with Dr. Travis Gales, our County Health Officer, COVID-19 response here in Montgomery County under the leadership of the County Executive and with the support and leadership also of the County Council. I want to talk a little bit about some of the recommendations the county has made around ventilation and filtration, particularly for the landlords among us to understand exactly what the county is recommending and why it matters. I know also Mr. McHugh and Mr. Nichols are here to address some of the other issues as well in the Q&A. I'm going to try and keep my comments relatively short. I'm sure there's going to be questions both about what I'm going to talk about, but anything else that's sort of COVID response related, I'm happy to address in the course of the question and answer. So last November, the county worked with some subject matter experts and produced some guidelines or recommendations around ventilation and filtration. I think this is an extremely important issue for addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'll explain why. So much of COVID-19 transmission is typically occurs in short range, meaning 6 feet or less between individuals. However, a portion of COVID-19 infection is actually transmitted over much longer distances utilizing air that is circulated where a COVID-19 positive person, maybe someone who doesn't know they're COVID-19 positive, ends up excreting virus through breathing, and it sort of is dispersed throughout an immediate area, and the dispersal and the length at which it stays in an environment depend wholly on the air exchange and filtration that apply to a particular area. And so obviously in many of your buildings, there will be individualized units, but there will also be common spaces. And so those common spaces, depending on how the air change rates are done and what the filtration you have in those spaces, could be opportunities where people could be exposing one another and furthering the spread of COVID-19 in your buildings. And so The county produced some recommendations that we think could help you all and your tenants and residents to be safer. And we tried to make some recommendations that we thought were both reasonable, but also relatively cost inexpensive, and in some cases no cost at all, to try and encourage people to do some activities that we thought would make things overall safer. And so you can find the things that I'm going to talk about on the county's website, montgomerycountymd.gov/COVID-19/ventilation. Will get you to the direct recommendations. So the first thing that we ask people to do is actually do a system assessment. And so depending on the age of your building, the age of your ventilation system, and the way it's designed, not just its age, you may have some more options or less options available to you to increase both the ventilation and filtration in your most particularly your common spaces in your building. And so you want to take a look at what the capabilities of your individual system are. You're not going to be able to implement all the other 5 recommendations that I'm going to talk about. You may be able to implement 1, 2, or 3 of them, depending on the way your system is set up. So the first thing that we talk about is some buildings, probably not many of your buildings, have what's referred to as demand controlled ventilation, meaning that as occupancy increases, the building naturally begins to increase the ventilation in a space. We encourage people to actually set that to the highest setting and turn off that modulation. And so you're having the maximum level of ventilation throughout your space if it's possible. The other big thing in getting to with COVID-19 is trying to turn over the air in a space. Now, we commonly think of these as air changes per hour, or a measure of how many cubic feet per minute of outdoor air you're bringing in. Honestly, for many of your spaces, I think this boils down to a couple things. Number one, you can look at increasing the ventilation rates, but many of your buildings will not be capable of doing that. The simplest thing for many of you to do is that at the earliest possible time when we have a little bit warmer weather, start to open up your doors and windows to increase ventilation in some shared spaces to the maximum extent possible. Yes, in some cases, this may result in a slight temperature drop in some of those spaces, but frankly, from a safety perspective, it's better to be a little bit cooler in the space than it is to be more stagnant air. And so we very much, as soon as you can start to begin to do it, begin to open up those doors and windows. That will accomplish greater air changeover than any modification to your ventilation and filtration system would. One of the big things that the county is very concerned about is climate change. We do not want you to make changes to your system that have long-term inefficiency consequences. Obviously, we don't want to see things that are expensive for you all, because obviously that isn't beneficial for your sustainability, nor, if those costs are shared with the residents, their sustainability either. On the filtration side, if you can take a look at your system in that beginning step I told you, you can look at the quality of the filter that you are putting through your system. Right now, most recommendations say if you can get to a MERV 13 filter, that's ideal. Some of your systems will not be capable of taking a MERV 13 filter without creating significant airflow challenges that cause your systems to run at a much higher level and could actually burn out some of your systems. So you have to really know your system to make sure that it is capable of receiving that kind of filter. And then the final thing I would say is, actually 2 more things. So when you talk about air changes per hour, we're really looking for people to get to 4 to 6. 5 is pretty much the ideal level you get to, and if anything above that is sort of gravy. So if you're looking for actual measurements, 4 to 6 is what we're recommending. And the last thing is, if you've got spaces that you don't have windows and you don't have doors to open, but you have a high throughput of people through that area, you can look at these standalone Hepa filtration units. They are effective at filtering out COVID-19 if they meet the Hepa definition. And so those are relatively inexpensive, and you can put those in spaces that are of high density and make your spaces a lot safer. So if you've got common areas that are shared in your buildings where people will want to congregate, or particularly, maybe indoor spaces where you have people congregate to do activities, particularly as we get into the spring and summer that are not outdoors, those kinds of standalone units can be an excellent way to sort of offset some of the filtration in those particular spaces. And so I think that's all I wanted to touch base with you all today. I think it's just incredibly important to realize that COVID-19 is going to be it's going to be around for, for the foreseeable future. We are making great progress in our vaccination. We've gotten about 15% of our population so far vaccinated with at least one dose, and about 8% fully vaccinated. Things are going to ramp up considerably over the next couple of months with the President Biden and his administration ramping up the available number of vaccine doses that we're going to receive. But even as we do these vaccinations, continuing to practice these good behaviors and really improving what we do based on what we've learned is going to be important for us to make sure that we can continue keeping people safe into the summer and fall months ahead. And so I think I'll stop there, and I don't know if Dan or Keen had anything to add at all, but we can take some questions at this point.
We're watching questions coming in the Q&A and in the chat. Some of it was related to where the information is available. We'll be putting the links in the chat for the websites that Dr. Stoddard mentioned. And I don't see specific questions. There's one just recommending brands of Hepa portable filters. Is that anything that we have any information on?
So the county has not made any recommendations on particular brands, because obviously that's sort of an inappropriate thing for a government to do in terms of recommending a particular product. That said, the Harvard School of Public Health has a healthy buildings program, and I'll see if I can get the link for you all to share. They do some analysis on some different branding. I think they're a pretty reputable source for how you can pick a HEPA filter. And I would certainly recommend that people take a look at that. We'll provide the link. I think it's a good place. I think they do an analysis around their page for what to look for in a HEPA filtration unit, depending on the space that you're looking to serve.
Okay. And all right, so I'm not seeing separate questions on this. Anything that Dan or Keen would like to add from a property code during the period of the emergency? Okay, so not hearing anything. All right, so we will we'll track questions and we'll see if we get anything coming back in as we transition. But we're going to transition to the rental assistance conversation. And Alana Branda is going to lead us in this conversation.
Thank you, Frank. Bear with me, everyone, for just a moment. I have a couple of slides, so I'm just going to pull those up for us. Okay, so as Frank mentioned, I'm Alana Branta. I serve as the Deputy Chief for Services to End and Prevent Homelessness. We are responsible for the housing stabilization services in the county, so all the eviction prevention, moving, storage, utility, burial assistance, all of those programs, including all of our COVID rent relief programs. So I'm going to try to keep my slides pretty brief and hopefully get to questions that will come in the Q&A chat. Okay, so hopefully all of you are actually aware that we have been running our COVID rent relief program. The program started initially back in May of 2020 with an initial supplemental appropriation of $2 million from the County Council to support households who had had a COVID-related loss of income and therefore struggling to pay their rent. In September, we relaunched phase 2, which was funded with $21 million from the coronavirus relief funds. We are closing out phase 2 now. Those were grants of up to $4,000 that were provided. They were open to households with both formal and informal leases. We did not do any verification of citizenship with that. And as I mentioned, we're finishing closing those out now. So I'm sure many of you have residents who did receive support through that program. We do still have some grants that we are finishing. We anticipate having all of the COVID phase 2 monies out the door by the end of this month. So please, we may, if our caseworkers may be reaching out to confirm rent ledgers and get you registered in our system so you can receive checks, and please just be responsive so we can get those checks out. As we are closing this up, we are getting ready for our phase 3. So the phase 3 is funded by the Treasury Department, has its emergency rental assistance program. That was part of the last large bill passed at the end of December. The county received around $31 million in funds that we will be using towards rent assistance. Because it is run through the Treasury, there are some requirements that we have to comply with on the Treasury level, and then some stuff we are implementing locally too. So there must still be, of course, a COVID-related loss of income. This is targeted towards households that their income from the previous 30 days is below 50% of area median income. So around $50,000 for a family of 4 in Montgomery County. And again, that's just the previous 30 days. That's not looking at pre-COVID income. They have to be behind a month, paying at least 40% of their income towards rent, whatever that income is now. We are going to be giving priority to households that are in high need census tract areas. That information is on our website that's linked here, what those areas are. I want to reiterate that as a priority, that is not an eligibility. So we do encourage anyone who meets the other criteria to apply. And priority will also be given to households where the wage earners have been unemployed for at least the previous 90 days. So as I mentioned, this is coming through the Treasury. They just issued updated guidance on the 22nd of February. They're hosting a briefing session with recipients of the funds actually tomorrow. And so we are working on final guidance and issuance, and we will get our applications out by the end of this month. We anticipate to be accepting applications. We did get a lot of feedback from our round 2 that the portal that we used for the applications was not so conducive, both from a user-friendly perspective, from the landlord's ability to support tenant applications, and from an ability to kind of check in status. So we are getting a new portal that will allow all of those things to happen. It will actually, if one of your tenants applies, it will prompt you to complete your end of the application, which is basically confirming their tenancy, rent ledger, W-9. And so we're really excited that we'll be able to get that in, and that hopefully will allow us to greatly speed up the ability to actually issue those payments and checks on their behalf. 2 other quick things to note, just that if a household did receive funds under either our first round or the second round, they would be eligible for this third round, assuming they still meet all the criteria. So people can apply again. And we have the link for the wait list here. We will be contacting everyone who's on the wait list via the email they submitted, or if they did not submit an email, we'll make a phone call when that application is available to make sure that they know to complete the full application. And I just want to take a brief moment and just mention some of our other services that we have that may be really helpful to your residents at this time. So, if I know courts are mostly not hearing cases, but if you do have an eviction case going through, we do provide eviction assistance. We also do provide eviction prevention assistance. We can provide funds to help cancel the eviction. If the eviction is not cancelable, we can provide assistance with moving and storage, and also first month's rent and security deposit to try to help that family transition from your property. If a family is experiencing homelessness, we also provide services, shelter. We have expanded our shelter beds due to the COVID-19 emergency, both for families and for single adults. And so they can, if someone needs shelter services, they can reach out to us. And then food support. We know many families are struggling and trying to pick, am I paying a utility bill, and am I putting food on my table, am I paying my rent? So please encourage households to call 311 to ask for the Food Access Call Center, and they will coordinate making sure they know where to access food support. Anyone who needs COVID testing, county is still conducting many COVID testing sites. If your residents pay their own utilities, So the bills are in their name and they're struggling to pay those bills or have a shut-off notice, they can call our Office of Home Energy Programs. Income eligible, we can actually just put credits on their account that does not require a shut-off notice. And if there is a shut-off notice, we can get a hold on that to give them time to work out a payment plan and to give us time to try to help them with some financial resources to pay that. And unfortunately, we are seeing in many of our properties, whether because of COVID or other reasons, we may have a family member who dies, and that could spiral into a family's inability and struggle to pay their rent. So we do provide burial assistance grants to funeral homes. So if any of your residents are in need of those services, they can also call us. And I apologize, I'm just realizing that's the wrong number. It has the OHEP number repeated twice. Just call 311 for burial assistance, and I'll get that corrected before the slides are shared. And of course, if anyone is in crisis and needs additional support, there are our crisis center and just general COVID, the county's COVID website. And that is it of my slides. So let me stop sharing my screen, and I can see the Q&A and chat is going, is hot. So I don't know, Frank, if you have specific ones you want
Well, there's a few
tagged for me.
that are repeated. One question is, can landlords apply on behalf of the tenant? And really, if you can help with the role that you see for a landlord in helping to manage an application or processing for the assistance.
Sure. That is a great question. So while the applicant does need to be involved, the actual tenant does need to be involved in the application themselves, anyone can help them complete that. It will be an online portal. So if your leasing office staff or anyone else at the property is willing to, have an individual sit in the office with them or be on the phone with them, you can be typing in those answers, collecting all that data and helping them walk through it. There are going to be questions that most likely only the tenant will have the answers to. It does have an identity verification in the new portal we'll be pushing out, and so you will need to have the tenant either on the phone or available to you to help you complete that on their behalf. But you definitely will be able to do that. There also will be the opportunity if, again, as I mentioned, for you to, as a landlord, to go in and submit your W-9, submit your rent ledgers, and you would be able to do that in bulk. So if you helped 10 of your tenants complete the application, you would be able to go in and upload those 10 rent ledgers and connect yourself to those 10 applications at the same time. So unfortunately, you can't apply as your own property and just saying, we've lost rent that we believe we've lost because of COVID and we need assistance, but I strongly encourage you to help facilitate your tenants applying and working with them to help them navigate through that portal so that ultimately you are receiving the money and those checks do go to the properties. And I see one just popped up. We are not yet accepting phase 3. We hope our plan is that we will be ready to begin accepting applications before the end of the month for phase 3. And we will make sure DHCA will announce that broadly, the county will announce that broadly, and we'll make sure it gets out to anyone who's on the wait list.
If you can restate at the website where right now, you can do a wait list. It does say that program is closed, but if you just clarify what folks should be recommending to their tenants to sign up for the wait list. Okay.
Unfortunately, Alana is experiencing some technical difficulties.
Okay, I will answer that question on her behalf, which is at the website. The links will be posted. They haven't already, but the information there relates to the phase 2. But there is a link for a wait list, and every tenant that believes they would be income eligible, and you as a landlord and property managers can help them to sign up for that. Let's see, other questions?
I am back. I'm so sorry. It just knocked me out for some reason, but.
Right. Okay. So other questions coming in. Is there any assistance available to landlords with their mortgage that they're responsible for? And I think we've lost Alana again.
Don't have any of that at the moment. I know. Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, you were freezing up. Go ahead.
Okay, let me stop my video. Hopefully that will help a little bit with audio. Unfortunately, HHS is not running any mortgage relief programs at the moment. There are some, I can see someone else is commenting, there are some, if you have a federally backed mortgage, there are some protections and forbearance opportunities. And so I'd encourage you to reach out to your mortgage holder and see what opportunities may be available for you.
There were a couple of questions on timing from the point of a COVID rent relief phase 2, the funds going out, and then what's expected for phase 3 from the point of an application. What should a landlord expect after applications are submitted?
Yeah, so timing for phase 2, we are finishing up. We anticipate having all of any phase 2 grants issued before phase 3 applications start being accepted. So those are, we're finishing those up in these next couple of weeks. In terms of documentation for phase 3, because it is a federal program, there are some guidelines and there are some more documentation that will be required. We will need confirmation of income. So that is some of the guidance we are working through with Treasury. There will be opportunities for self-assess statements, like if you have a resident who's the restaurant that they worked in closed down back in July and they have no way of reaching that former employer, there will be a way for them to still make a statement and confirm that lack of income that they have. So what will happen is when you go into the online application portal, it will walk you through all the information that we need. It will give the opportunity to upload all of that documentation. If the resident is not able to upload it at that time, they will be able to come back and upload that information later. Once a resident completes that information, if they identify the landlord in that information, the landlords will get a notification and being asked to confirm that residency, submit that rent ledger, and submit a W-9, and there will be instructions on how to register with the county if you are not already registered as a vendor with the county. Based on our prioritization, we will begin processing those applications then, and then the checks will go out directly to the landlords.
And there have been a few questions about whether or not payments are always made to the landlord, and that's essentially the answer, that payments are made directly to landlords. The tenants aren't paid directly if they're in a licensed property. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. There are some exception cases that end up popping up for various reasons, but 95% of the time that check is made directly to the property. And if you are registered with the county, that check will be made in whatever way you are registered, whether that's an ACH payment or a paper check that gets mailed to whatever address you have on file with the county.
Okay. Question about eligibility in all the municipal jurisdictions of the county: Gaithersburg, Rockville, Menlo Park, correct?
Yes, yes. With everyone within the Montgomery County boundaries.
Question about support for tenants with limited English skills. What is the recommendation for helping tenants that need assistance in languages?
So the application itself will be available in the top 7 languages spoken in Montgomery County: English, Spanish, Amharic, French, Korean, Vietnamese, and I think I'm forgetting one of them. I apologize, but it will be professionally translated and available in all of those languages. We also have, and the website also, all the background information will also be translated and updated with all of those languages. On staff ourselves, in terms of individuals who are processing cases, we have staff that is bilingual in English, Spanish, Amharic, Korean, we have, and Portuguese. We have a number of different languages represented, French, in-house in staff, and HHS also has access to a language line where if we need any other language, we can always get an interpreter on the phone and make sure that we can communicate to that individual in whatever language they need.
Okay. And there's a question whether or not the county is providing any relief to landlords in property tax related to the COVID, and the answer is no. There is no property tax address of landlord difficulties. I think we've touched on most of the topics. There's a question there that says, can the landlord have a pre-populated letter to be sent to residents to advise them of where to apply? And the answer is we will be, from the county, providing a lot of marketing and outreach materials, and we will be supporting all of our landlords with information that can be shared to their tenants. So you will be receiving information directly when this becomes available, and how to guide tenants to the website.
I understand there was still some clarification needed. If a tenant has received funding previously, they are still eligible to apply for phase 3. So they can apply for additional funds even if they received the $4,000 previously. They would be eligible for some additional funds. The funding will be grants generally of up to $6,000 per a household. And again, so even if they got, 3,000 from phase 1 or 4,000 from phase 2, they can still apply for some additional support at this point. Again, reiterating that the checks, if a landlord registers with the county, the check is put in your name and is sent directly to you. The only time a check is sent to the tenant directly is if the landlord does not want to register with the county. So I encourage all of you to register as a vendor with the county to make sure that you get that check. I see there's another question coming up about length of residency. So there are some things that we are still working through. And so I'm not unfortunately able to answer every question. We're still working through some of those details. But I see there's a lot of questions about arrears. The funds are specifically to support arrears and to have limited use for prospective or future rent. We are looking back at arrears, the arrears of 2020. We cannot be supporting payment of arrears prior to the public health emergency. And I know, Frank, you probably need to move on. I will work to answer some other of the questions either in the chat or the Q&A, wherever they were, that we didn't get to.
And a lot of the questions related here are going to be part of the next session. So thank you very much, Alana. So we're now going to hear from Rosie McCray-Moody with our Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs to address some of the questions that we've seen here in a presentation, and then we'll follow up with a Q&A session on the questions that we see. Thank you, Rosie.
Okay, I'm waiting for my slides to pop up. Okay, this is going to be quick. As you know, the COVID Relief Act of 2020 required all landlords not to raise rents more than the voluntary rent guideline, which is issued annually. And last year was 2.6%. Effective February 5th, 2021, The voluntary rent guideline is 1.4%. So any notices of rent increase issued on or after February 5th cannot exceed 1.4%. If you issued a notice prior to February 5th for the 2.6 number, that notice is perfectly fine. Next slide, please. The code limits on rent increases apply to all licensed rental units. And each rent increase notice must contain, it has to be 90 days. It has to be written. It must contain the old rent, the proposed new rent, and the percent change, which is 1.4%. And it has to tell the tenant that the voluntary rent guideline is indeed 1.4%. And no matter what, you can only raise rents once every 12 months. Next slide, please. The governor's order temporarily prohibiting evictions is still in effect. And that prohibits you from evicting a tenant for failure to pay rent. And so tenants are still eligible to apply for the monies that Ilana was still just talking about. And once the court does open, they can say that they had loss of income due to COVID issues, and that is an affirmative defense, and it'll be up to the court to decide what to do. And the governor's order will remain in effect until an emergency is lifted. Next slide, please. The CDC order is also still in effect, and that will remain in effect until March 31st. And that's still, it's a moratorium on evictions. So at least until March 31st, you can't evict anybody for failure to pay rent due to loss of income based on COVID. Next slide, please. The courts are not hearing any failure to pay rent cases between now and March 14th. And on March 14th, they're supposed to start hearing cases, and they're still working out how that's going to work. And they will hear emergency tenant holding over and breach of lease cases. And any writs that were issued prior to the court shutting down are still in full force and effect, and they can be. And so those evictions can take place. That's it for me. I'm done. And I'm going to turn it over to Frank for more landlord-tenant issues.
Well, just to complete the role of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, in addition to the code work and the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, we also responsible for the licensing. And it's important to know that the license renewal fees are on hold under the governor's executive order that was issued last year, that across the state, fees could not be mandated. However, to allow flexibility to manage your accounts, we have sent out notes that you can make payments, and we are set up to receive licensing fees and to credit them to the account. And many property managers and landlords have taken advantage of that flexibility to manage their books. So that remains an option available, but we will provide notice when the emergency declaration is rescinded, and we'll have a 60-day period for license fees to be caught up. They're still owed, there's no forgiveness. And at our website, you can find information about that. So we have information on the website. I'll ask to be posted on the screen here, that the key thing about the department and the rest of the county is that we are open and available. You can find all the information that you've heard earlier pretty much linked through the DHEA website. We link to the Department of Health and Human Services. We link to the safety information, all the requirements, property-based requirements, and we remain committed to responding to all of your concerns. So please, you got a lot of questions here. We're going to start answering some of them, but anything we don't get to, please follow up with us. I especially want to highlight at the websites, and it's consistent with the information Alana was sharing on the rental assistance and what Rosie's sharing here on our landlord tenant requirements. We have contracted with and have available tenant support organizations. There's 4 organizations that are listed at our website. And as you have tenants, and some of the questions relate to tenants who are not responding, and we would recommend where you can to refer them to these organizations. They can support tenants across the county. They have specialists working in multiple languages. So we are focused on trying to provide support to you and your residents, your tenants, so that you can find ways to work together. We know that we're not going to be able to satisfy all of the financial need, but we hope that with the connections through the other resources, we can help tenants find tools and approaches to work with yourself and then to work through their situation. So we very much want to highlight that, and we're going to continue to support you through those organizations. So the kind of questions that came in, and whether or not the 1.4% rent increase applies to a landlord who has reduced rent in the past due to COVID. Is there any case where the 1.4% notice increase can be exceeded? That's a question to Rosie.
Is there any, say it again?
Any situation where the 1.4% rent increase can be exceeded for any reason?
Not during the emergency, no.
Okay. All right. A lot of questions have come in advance and in the chat related to what options are available to landlords where they have a tenant who just refused to respond and is not making any attempt to make payments. And there's concerns that the tenants are taking advantage of the current situation with the courts not being open. Is there any information or advice that you would share with landlords?
Unfortunately, there are tenants who are doing exactly that. And there's really not much we can do about it, because you can only evict people through the court process, and they know you can't take them to court right now. Court hopefully will start again on March the 14th, and then you can follow through. But even then, there's a tremendous backlog. And so really, no, it's nothing we can do.
Okay. There are questions related to the expiration of leases and the requirements or the options available to landlords when a tenant's lease expires.
There's no legal obligation to renew a lease. If the lease expires and you don't want to renew it, just let it go. Just let it go month to month, because by operation of law, it goes to month automatically.
Okay. And the notice that they would have to provide if they did not want to renew?
If you don't want to renew and you want the people to leave, you can give a notice to vacate. If you just don't want to offer a 2-year lease or 1 year, then you just let it go month to month. Leave it as it is.
Okay. There's a question of a tenant who's paying half the rent now, but did not have a formal agreement, but a verbal agreement. If a tenant is making partial payments, what is the legal requirements or obligations? What does that tenant still owe? Or
they owe the rest of the. If you're taking partial payments, that means that the tenant is trying. The tenant probably has lost the job and doesn't have the income they used to have, so they're paying something. Because a lot of people are sitting there paying absolutely nothing. So if you have a tenant that is paying half, take the half and give them credit, and encourage them to apply for whatever benefits are out there. The 4,000, the new 6,000, whatever's out there, encourage that tenant to apply for that, because this tenant is trying their best. And you can also refer them to the organizations that Frank was talking about, Renters Alliance, CASA, LEDC, and they can help negotiate, because there is assistance out there, and try to encourage them to apply for all the assistance that they can. And you as the landlord are obligated to keep a ledger. So just keep records. And so If the rent's $1,000 a month and you know you're only getting 500, they're just carrying that balance.
There's a question related to tenants who are in arrears or delinquent on their rent. Is the landlord still required to maintain the property during a period of rental delinquency?
Yes. By law, they have to maintain it in clean, safe, sanitary condition and in compliance with applicable law. Yes, they do.
Okay. Question related to charging of late fees. Is there any limitation or restriction on the charging of late fees under any of the current requirements?
No. So if you don't pay the rent, you owe 5% of the rent due. So if the rent's $1,000 and they didn't pay the whole 1,000, you can charge the late fee. If they're paying half, you might want to not charge them the 5% just to not make the debt bigger than it already is. But there's no prohibition on it.
I will mention that we've worked with a number of landlords who have been waiving the late fees and working with their tenants to try and find middle ground and work through things, especially with the potential for the rental assistance coming in. So I will just add that we're hopeful that as you get information, you can help your tenants connect with assistance, that you can work with them to find common ground. We believe there's going to be a need to maintain as many tenants as you can, as you know, with the difficulties. And we're hopeful that the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs and the nonprofits that can work to help you and your tenant work together, and with the rental assistance, we can try and help you bridge that gap. Additional questions on whether or not there's blank leases available or rent increase notices. Are there any support documents available to landlords to help them meet the requirements?
The rent increase, there's a sample rent increase notice on our website. So per this slide, go to the website, that's there. I'm currently in the process of updating the lease. So the lease that's up there is from 2017, it's old. Okay. The lease summary is fine, but the lease itself is a little older, and I'm trying to get that updated right now, even as we speak.
Okay. I don't know if you can see other questions, Rosie. We've captured a lot of the processes. Questions on starting the eviction process, while the courts are closed, and the process. There is, what are landlords prohibited from doing or allowed to do during this period?
You can still file, and they'll just put you in the queue, but they're not scheduling anything, but you can still file. And once they start over, they'll send you notice of when your case is.
Okay. Okay.
And I see one, if you issue a notice of rent increase prior to February 5th, that does not exceed 2.6% is fine. And I don't care if they agree to it or not. If it exceeds 2.6%, it's not valid. It's a violation of the law.
Okay. And there's questions about other assistance available to tenants. Again, beyond what the COVID rent relief program phase 3 will allow. There's connections at these websites. There are some economic assistance, but not direct rental assistance that we're familiar with. But again, please use the website to find and connect people to information. There's a couple of questions on the definition of the state of emergency, the health emergency. The governor's executive orders are all tied to the state of emergency, which is renewed on a monthly basis. So it does not have an expiration date, but it has been renewed consistently. And we have no indication that anything is subject to change anytime soon in the current environment. And since I think we still have some of our property staff, we had questions that came up after we transitioned, had to do with face covering requirements in the property, and whether there's any requirement for a time period for safety protocols between the number of days that a unit needs to be vacant, if there is anything between one tenant and a next tenant. I don't know if Dan or Keen can address the property related safety protocol. Okay.
Yeah, there are no time frames between tenancies as of yet. We've heard through CDC or anything. It's basically, turn over your unit and, go from there. As far as face coverings, everyone should have posters posted up throughout their complexes, making sure that the tenants are aware of the social distancing and the face mask requirements that are here within Montgomery County.
Okay. And, there's a question, and Rosie, you can help with, what's the definition of emergency during the current period for the filing of breach of lease, tenant holding over?
It's kind of up to the court, but if you have somebody who's creating disturbances, if you've had to call the police, if you keep getting numerous complaints from other tenants about this person, if they, if you feel like they're a danger to themselves or others, that type of thing, that's considered an emergency.
There's a question that came up about 2-year leases and specifically asked, could a 2-year lease allow a 2.8% increase?
No.
Clarify what's required on the way 2-year lease.
You can do 1.4 for the first year and 1.4 for the second.
Okay. And that 1.4% is tied to the time at which the lease is signed, so that it's governed by the voluntary rent guideline at the time the lease is signed, even if it's for a second year.
Yeah.
Okay.
So no rent increase issued during the emergency can exceed 1.4%.
Okay. There's a question that came up away from rental, just asked whether the 1.4%, are there any restrictions on condominium fee increases? And the answer is no. It's a rent lease legal standard. There are no requirements or standards or caps on condominium fee changes. There were a few questions on whether there was any guidelines for air filtration for single family homes. And I'm comfortable with what was being spoken to was, the guidelines were fundamentally for the air handling systems, but the broader guidelines were for increasing ventilation by opening windows and doing as much air transition as possible in all properties, and particularly common areas was being spoken to, but single unit rentals, the guidelines would be to maximize air transition and to look into what can be done within the existing systems or configuration of the property.
I saw one on there saying, could they knock on doors? You can knock on doors to ask for money, but you need to be careful with it because it can be construed as harassment, and it can be construed as coming there without giving them 24 hours notice or telling them what you want. So And my thing is, if they know they owe you money, knocking on the door is not gonna make them pay.
One other question came in on code management, if you don't mind, Dan or Keen, just on, if a tenant is obligated to maintain property under their lease or landlord maintenance of property under the requirements, is there any changes to requirements based on the current emergency status?
No.
No, tenants are bound by the same obligations that they have to maintain their unit as it would normally.
Okay. Okay. We are coming up to the close here. Just do want to repeat, we've got on the website for those that are not able to see it. We have information at the main Montgomery County md.gov/DHCA. And we have the fundamental answer, which is to call 311. Any question you've got, the 311 process will redirect you and provide you some information, but redirect you to the county department and staff that can best answer your question. We do have an email address, for questions and information on our Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, which is olta.intake@montgomerycountymd.gov. And for licensing, we have dhca.licensing@montgomerycountymd.gov. And to reiterate, we will be posting this video and webinar to our website within a couple of days. And that's the Montgomery County DHCA office. And we will be reviewing all the questions came in. We tried to touch on the most common questions, but we will try to, in our web pages, clarify and improve what we, and how we say the information that we're sharing today. So we very much appreciate your input. And a lot of the information that was being spoken to, Rosie mentioned it, is we do have a landlord tenant handbook. Just about everything that you need to know about relationship requirements is included in that, and that's sourced at the website. So please review, a lot of the information, a lot of the questions that we're talking to today can be found in that document through the website.
Yes. Somebody asked if there's a code handbook. Yes, there is. It's online.
Yep, and the code handbook is also online with all the details, and it's very user friendly. And again, you can reach us for any questions related to it, but we try and make a lot of information available that way. So we've reached 3 o'clock. I want to thank everyone that's able to join us. I want to thank our panelists and continue to maintain the contact. And we hope that we can find ways to work together to support you and support your residents through this process. So thank you very much. A lot in a short period of time. Hopefully it's been helpful.